So I want to talk about two of my students. One gentleman, his name is Scott Pattison. He actually participated in our online master's program because he lives in Portland and Corvallis is about an hour and a half away. He works at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. So what's great about this program is he could actually be a student while he was still working. And his master project, which he's just finishing up, looks at the informal interactions that staff have with families. And in a moment, I'll tell you a little bit about what he's finding out. He just started our doctoral program. This young man is he's on a bus. There's a bus between Portland and Corvallis, and fortunately our doctoral courses are set up so they're on one day, but he takes a bus from Portland and comes to campus on Tuesdays, and I'm so excited because he's really, remember this name, he's gonna be a real star. And another star, rising star, is Jennifer Bachman. She is a student who's also in the midst, hopefully by the end of the year, completing her PhD. And her study focused on home educating families, actually looking at what does science, technology, engineering, and mathematics look like for these families. And actually, thanks to Robert, she and Scott actually presented at one of the regional workshops. She did a sub-study, which, by the way, we decided to put into her dissertation. She talked to home educators about what museums should know about them. Does that include questions? Oh, darn. Okay. Okay, real fast. Okay, I thought maybe I'd blown the question part. Okay, great. Sorry. Lynn is Lynn. She can't be anything. I was supposed to stand here like this and behave, but I'm doing my best. Okay. Scott's study, the master's study, was done in two labs in the museum, a chemistry lab and a physics lab. And actually what he did in his study is actually just videotape what went on when families were in an area and either a facilitator came up or if it was the family that happened to cross the magic line that us researchers talk about, perhaps walked into a space and there was a facilitator there. But what was really important, these were interactions that were not scripted. The whole point was, what happens in this interaction? And it comes down, there's data now that respect and respecting families and what they're doing is really, really important. Actually, he videotaped 50 segments of families. What was astonishing and actually quite sobering is and this is a great institution, by the way, and they do a great job of professional development with their facilitators. In only 2 instances did the facilitator greet the family. You think about it, remember you're standing there talking to adults and your kids walk up and they jump into the conversation, and what you do is you say, honey, just wait a minute, I'm talking. And one of the lessons that you're teaching your children is that actually you wait until there's a right moment, and then you say, hi, excuse me. These facilitators were jumping in, no greeting, instantly trying to focus on, of course, the science of what was going on. And in fact, these families often were doing that, but they'd already started. Thank you. There was already a facilitator in that group, not always, but often the adult. And actually what is fascinating in his research is to see a huge tussle going on between the facilitator and whoever was the facilitator of the museum and whoever was the facilitator of the family, to the point actually of the family member finishing the sentences of the facilitator, trying to show that I know as much as you. And actually what he discovered is those interactions were only successful if there was a respectful interaction between the adult and the facilitator. because the adult in the family is the gatekeeper to whether that's a successful interaction or not. So I'm really excited. I think he's going to pursue this further in his dissertation. The home education study, interestingly, very similar findings. And this was, by the way, an effort by Jennifer. She developed a questionnaire and said she asked people in an open-ended sort of way, what do you want museums to know about you as a home educator? Number one, they want to be treated as equals. Of all parents, these are parents who are, for the most part, not all, but they are capable teachers. And actually, one of the things she's discovering in her study is a big reason why a lot of people are home educating. And by the way, she did not include families that were choosing to educate for religious reasons. So this is sort of the sort of, in terms of this is really philosophically. The reason many of them were doing this is because they wanted to learn with their children. Learning together was really important. They want extended experiences. I mean, if you think about it, these are the visitors we want to have. They want extended experiences. They'll do pre-post activities. We know that, that doesn't always happen. We send this stuff out to teachers, and, God bless them. They've got a lot going on. But, we struggle to get them to do that stuff. They want to connect to other museums and libraries. They want to know, what can I do next? And actually, they're looking, many of them have very strong values around learning and public service and community. They want their children to be doing real things and helping out in the community. They want you to know that age does not connote grade level. As they say, they're not even sure what that grade level thing means. They want it to be complex. They don't want this sense that somehow you're dumbing it down for them, which, we can talk a lot about if that's even a useful term. They want special experiences. They want their child to get to meet a curator or to go behind the scenes. They want that. And something that's very important that we've learned in this study, and it depends on the region of the country that you're in, but there's a perception that the only people who can home educate are people who are wealthy enough that only one person works. And what we're discovering is families are they're making a commitment to not have a second car or to not go on big fancy trips so they can educate at home. So they're also looking for affordability, and certainly in our area, many of these families are rural. They're looking for access to resources.
Good morning.
And actually, for my benefit, if people would introduce themselves and say where they're from, that would really...
My name is Max. I'm from the Mystic Seaport Museum in
cool.
Mystic, Connecticut.
Yeah.
The Museum of America and the Sea.
Yeah, a long time ago, I was there doing some work.
You need to come back. Scott said that he had successful interactions, or you documented successful interactions. How do you define, or how did he define a successful interaction or outcome?
Oh, Max, that's a great question. Something that was interesting, and some of you in this room may be familiar with the Connor Prairie study about conversations and different kinds of interactions with staff. One of the successes was just that the family stayed engaged, because, here this family was doing this cool stuff. And in some instances, when the facilitator came up and started saying, well, the chemistry of this is blah, 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 the family left. They voted with their feet. That it's free choice learning. So that was one avenue, was just that they stayed engaged. Another successful pattern was that the facilitator and the adult or child, in a couple of instances, who was facilitating slipped into a mode of co-facilitation, where they sort of worked together. And in fact, what the facilitator from the institution did is look to the adult for that information that they knew maybe what this kid already knew, or in one instance, the kid knew what the adult actually didn't know and helped facilitate that. So that was one interaction. That they actually created a space in which the people in the family could ask questions of their own and could pursue something that they were curious about. Those are some of the examples. But actually, the bottom line was, in a lot of the instances, it was just not cutting off what was going on already. So, if that's helpful. Other questions? Other things you're trying to do?
My name is Deborah Sovany. I'm an exhibit designer at Jen Crocker Museum Associates. And my question has to do, and I'm wondering if you can address, there's two things. One is that I have seen that during my career, the families that are most interested and most engaged in family learnings are those families that are typically in a socioeconomic group that the family is already kind of predisposed to that. And for those families that may not be predisposed, admission to a museum can be a big stumbling block. And I don't think that library passes quite, is going to cover it.
Yeah.
And then the second, and I've seen this in my own extended family, is that there are those people that, for whom the entertainment value is by far number one, because that's what their family values, and that they're willing to pay the money, to go to Disney World and spend $75 a day per person, because that's regarded as valuable. And I actually think that that a lot of America is actually like that. And then so then you have the issue of coming to a museum or a historic house. How do you reinforce for families that are not predisposed, that this is a valuable experience and worth spending their money on?
Yeah, those are excellent questions, and they're actually quite related to one another, actually, because I could spend an hour talking about this. And by the way, I'm not, once again, advertising, but I am finishing a book on family learning that will be done by the end of this year and out next year. And I actually really try to address this in a little more complex way than I can in a question. I think that our institutions have been functioning with a business model that was all about entry fees. And for some of us, unfortunately, just because of what's going on economically, it's just been a matter of survival. But actually, it's a model that isn't sustainable, actually, and we're discovering that in this economic time. And because of that whole value, actually, I would say the value of learning in our society. So, it's the flip side of we're a learning society, but we're not accustomed to thinking about what high-quality learning sort of costs and so forth. So actually, one of the things, and I keep coming back to this 95% solution, but this was so great. We had an opportunity to actually say that if we can demonstrate, which we can, and this actually part of this article, and I'm willing if you want to post it, it provides evidence for the value of these kinds of experiences above and beyond K-12. We make the statement that we know that education is underfunded, but actually, in some ways, some of that funding is not used very well. And we suggest that if indeed what we're saying is lifelong learning and learning across the lifespan and the kind of learning that happens in these settings is important to us as a society, we should be investing in that education. Now that's great. You know, it doesn't really answer your question, but actually I think I am really heartened right now. Certainly in the science education world right now, there's a whole changing dialogue about out of school time and about extra I can't even, EOPs, I can't even remember what it's some Department of Education term, but at any rate, there's an increasing, this dialogue's starting to happen. So on the one hand, I think we need to be trying to figure out how we can get a different system in terms of supporting our institutions. We need to be working with social service organizations in our community. We need to be arguing that our institutions are about public value that improves communities, improves health, all the issues that our communities are trying to address right now. And I think that that's really important. We need to be looking for different funding so that actually we can begin to provide opportunities for families who do look at the price of a visit and say, you know, I can't afford that. However, there's also evidence, and this is where value comes in, that these families are spending money doing things. So there's a huge, even poor families, there's a real huge educational process that we need to become engaged in really actually empowering families. I've done a lot of work with families in poor communities, and actually many of the parents have not had a role to play in their kids' education. They're trying to keep food on the table. They're trying to keep their kids clothed, and they actually think the job of education is schools. So one of the things that I've done in my work is just say, you know, you're the first and foremost teacher. You know, those of us in some socioeconomic levels, we know that. That's not a known entity. So that's one thing. Another thing is that there is sometimes fear about going to those institutions. Actually, there was a study done here in Boston at the Museum of Science, and families, part of the reason they didn't go was economics, but another part of the reason they didn't go was they didn't feel comfortable, and the discomfort they had is they didn't want to look stupid in front of their children. And they perceived, unlike we think these are such inviting, wonderful places, guess what? For a lot of families, they're not. The other thing I've learned in doing this work is there is, in some ways this term is derogatory, but there's low-hanging fruit. There are parents out there in poor communities that are looking for things for their children to do. Actually, there was a study a few years ago done at did successful parenting look like in inner city families, and there were 3 characteristics. One is those parents knew where their kids were. There were curfews and rules, and they knew where they were. The second was that they did support their in-school stuff. They worried about homework. They talked to them about school. But the third was they sought out resources in the community that would support their children. Summer programs, after-school programs, programs on the weekend. We need to get on those lists for those families. And they are willing. By the way, actually part of Jen's study, the home educating study, families are home educating in urban areas, and they're doing it in a co-op sort of way. And they're also, you know, they're putting their kids in private schools. They're deciding that education is really, really important, and they're making sacrifices to do that. The final issue, I think one of the things we need to embrace is that not everyone in our society is going to ever want to come to our place. And it's hard because we know they're so great and we know they're so wonderful. But we're not amusement parks. Actually, the gentleman from Mystic Seaport, there was a study done there a while back where they talked to people about what they wanted to do when they came. And, they wanted to ride a ship and have a sea experience with a storm. And, and guess what? That's not what they're going to get at Mystic Seaport. Now, you might say that maybe we should have given people some options rather than saying, what do you want to do? But that's sort of what some of those families wanted to do. But I think we need to be clear about what we do and what we do well, and position ourselves as really being a place that can make a difference in a child's life and, frankly, in a family's life. Families are looking for, we're living fast-paced lives. We are don't always have the time to spend with our kids. One of the findings in these studies of lots of programs trying to reach underserved, what are called in the science education world, sort of underserved, underrepresented families, is that the families are so grateful for a place where they really can feel good about being a parent. I mean, I think many of these parents in poor communities, they have horrible self-esteem about themselves as parents. They want to be good parents, but they haven't had the modeling and the family history of knowing how to do that. I'm sorry, I went on and on, but I'm really passionate about that topic, if you couldn't tell. Other questions, comments?
Good morning. My name is Sean. I'm from the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum.
I know who you work with.
And at the beginning, you talked about the sort of the infrastructure, learning infrastructure.
Yeah.
I really, as a visual learner, I really appreciate the diagram.
Oh, great.
And I know a lot of theorists, child development theorists, talk about how it's important for children when they connect different elements of that infrastructure, it reinforces the learning for them. So is that also important in the infrastructure that you presented? And if so, how and what are some ways that we can connect to some of the other elements in the infrastructure? And I think you started to talk about a little bit of that in your previous answer.
Yeah. That's a great question. Yeah, I think that it's absolutely essential. And it's essential both for the learning process, but it's also essential for helping people know what is that trajectory they can take to build on what they're learning. So, it's funny, and we are so grateful to IMLS for their support. In some ways, they've really pushed on this quite a bit by their efforts to have collaborations between museums and libraries. I think what we need to do, though, and NSF has also, National Science Foundation, funded a lot of efforts. They require collaboration. I think what we haven't quite figured out yet, though, is how do we do that in our day-to-day work when we don't have a grant? Because sometimes what happens when those projects are over is the collaboration sort of breaks down. And so I think one of the suggestions we've made to some communities, on occasion we get invited maybe to a city or a county, is trying to have some meetings where you pull together the parties that care, for instance, about history in your community, and include formal educators and include the partners. Think about who are all the players: public television, the libraries, museums, if there are history clubs, think about genealogy societies, and pulling together leaders from these different entities to say, what do we want our 5-year plan for learning about history in our community to be, and how can we work together to accomplish that? And what could some opportunities be for children at different ages, for families, actually for older adults? I don't know if you guys, I'm staying in a hotel, so I got a USA Today. The cover of USA Today it's really fascinating. I can't wait to send it to my brother-in-law because he turned 65 last week. It's about the baby boomers turning 65. And, he was in that first wave. That's the opening of floodgates. Another community that we really need to get around are older adults. And guess what? A lot of them are bringing their grandchildren to these settings. There's a great picture, and we'll see it tonight, I guess. There's a mess area where you can pretend you're a group of sailors eating your meal together. And the plan was that everyone would sit on the floor. Well, guess what? There were a lot of grandparents. And so in prototyping, now there's a bench. And there's a great photo that we'll probably see it this afternoon of kids down on the floor and Granny's there eating and enjoying the experience, but she's sitting on a bench. So I think that we really, tapping into Exploralis, or whatever their new name is, Elder Hostel, to senior homes, senior daycare centers. Oh, I can feel the hook. Okay. Well, anyway, that's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I will be here all day and happy to answer questions individually. Thank you so much.